This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. I'm in Greenville, South Carolina for this episode 231 of the podcast. My first time in Greenville, South Carolina.
Welcome.
Well, thank you. Joining me on the podcast is Cameron Owens of the 8th State, a budding, very hip brewery in Greenville, known for making some interesting progressive styles and very flavor-forward things. We're going to talk about making those kinds of beers, from flavorful dessert stouts. I'm trying to move past the word pastry just to piss off Alex Kidd and change the lexicon on this. We're going to call them dessert stouts.
Adjuncted stouts.
We're also going to talk about flavorful kettle soured, quick soured beers, and we're going to talk about a few other things because right now we're also drinking an unfiltered lager, and they love to play in all of those spaces. We're going to talk to Cameron about how he does all those things here at the 8th State. Before we do that, for nearly 30 years, G&D Chillers has set the mark for quality equipment you can rely on. G&D stands above the rest as the only chiller manufacturer that engineers your glycol piping for free. G&D also stands alone as the only chiller manufacturer with an in-house team of installers and engineers with 30 years of real-world field labor experience in breweries, wineries, and distilleries. Contact the Total Glycol System Design experts today at gdchillers.com. Also, support for this episode comes from BSG and the Malt House by RAR. The Malt House is your online source for cool and exclusive RAR Malting Company gear that you can't get anywhere else. T-shirts, hoodies, hats, socks, glassware, and even gear for your pets. Rep the malt you brew with and look sharp doing it. Take the tradition home at themalthouse.com. That's the malt, HAUS.com. So Cameron, my voice sounds really good today because I've been talking all day long at our Brewery Accelerator event up in Asheville. But tonight I've decided to pop down here and talk to you about brewing these beers in Greenville. Give us the background on the 8th State. What does this arc for brewing look like for you? You come from a creative background, and but then you discovered brewing, and that kind of seeds your creative passion. And, now we are here at the 8th State, and you have built this reputation for making cool, flavorful beers. Yeah. What's that arc look like? What got you through this?
So it originally started off kind of as just a lifestyle project where I was doing, DJ mixes and clothing and things that were not beer. Being in the food industry,
I'm adding you to this list of friends in the brewing world that I know that have been involved in music and record labels or bands in the past. And there's a whole bunch of them who realized that selling beer is much more profitable enterprise than selling music, especially in this digital age when Spotify and others are give nothing back to musicians.
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, originally, the background I did come from at school was essentially doing packaging science as well as doing fine arts. I had a minor in fine art and then basically didn't finish school. So I have a lot of student debt. So that's a positive.
So why not go into the lucrative career like brewing beer?
Yeah, exactly.
That's definitely the way to pay off student debt.
I mean, it definitely is an easy way to get into being in the food industry.
Yeah.
So, I've been in food industry since I was a teenager, and I basically have continued doing that and was trying to figure out how I could form ways to put my interests and hobbies together while also having a cohesive environment. That kind of turned into me, making homebrews, trying to make cider. They didn't really work out too well until I started working and doing a kind of little more production, kind of small scale batches. Eventually, we have the 8th State Brewing and realized that, beer can actually pay for things, and art is pretty hard to make money off of unless you are pretty amazing at it or pretty prolific at it.
The 8th State was this amorphous brand and creative and other kinds of fields, but you've then been able to bring the 8th State brand into the brewery now and turned it into a brewery itself.
Yeah, and that's kind of interesting too, is because the Eighth State is actually, it's more revolving around the Eighth Circuit model, and the Eighth Circuit model is a social consciousness model. Essentially, it examines social evolution at any present point in time or future point in time, and so we're kind of explaining like your most basic feelings to your most complex and outer body kind of feelings. So what I mean is, you know, being happy and sad can kind of be related to drinking alcohol, where a neurosomatic circuit or the fourth circuit of being on the eighth stage is hedonism or elation, and that's kind of related to marijuana or cannabis. And then when you look at the higher consciousness or your eighth state, which is more related to like ayahuasca or other kinds of things, this is community and social awareness, and that realizing that, you know, we all are interconnected, and that the only really way to get there is by really trying to see higher and above what you are and really trying to change yourself consistently. So yeah.
And so that's the goal of this small brew pub in Greenville, South Carolina.
Yeah. And, you know, in kind of weird ways like that is, you know, we have different kinds of, you know, cocktails or different bar program things. We have kind of the art on the walls. We have different kinds of music playing. We rotate our beer frequently, and we rarely kind of put the same beers on, and that's kind of we have same core styles as opposed to core beers, and this kind of allows us flexibility in what we want to do and how we want to grow as a company, and it allows me freedom to be kind of allow me to change and grow as a person as well. So
this is your first professional approach to brewing, or did you brew at another brewery before this?
So actually the current spot that you're in was originally a home brew shop, and then as well as a U-brew where people could come on premise and brew. There was another head brewer at that point in time, along with myself and another brewer. We were brewing, I think they originally had, it was like 30 or 40 different like half barrel and 1 barrel tanks.
Right.
And then that concept maybe wasn't for Greenville at that point in time. Myself and one of the owners kind of had talked, and I told him, you know, I have gained enough knowledge that I was going to be pursuing the eighth state in a former fashion, and so we kind of got on board together with creating the eighth state here, with its own limitations, but at the same time, you know, it allowed me to get a start of an idea or a vision out before I think maybe it was too late, because I don't know. I feel like beer's really weird anymore. Maybe that's just a weird observation, but the excitement towards beer is maybe not what I used to see it as. And maybe that's just as a brewer, or maybe that has a lot to do with coronavirus. And I think it probably does have a lot to do with that, but I think it's really slowed down beer as a whole, which, you know, sucks, but it also is just kind of getting through it and evolving with that.
Right. So what year did you open the eighth? What year did the eighth state manifest?
So the very end of September, beginning of October of 2018.
Okay.
And so we're about 3.5 years, a little less than 3.5 years old. And it feels like we're only like a year and a half old.
Sure. We had 2 years of just timeout. It was just timeout.
It was really great. You know, we first opened our bar program with all of our bourbon, and we had tiki cocktails and everything. And this is like the very beginning of March 2020. And essentially we go to Pastry Town, and all of a sudden New York goes into a state of emergency, and we're like, are we going to go? And then they were like, well, we have a bottle release next weekend. That never happened. And so all of that stuff up there was just put on hold for like almost 2 years.
Yeah. This is a small spot. To describe it to people, you've got a 3-barrel brew house here. It's very compact. You are stumbling over yourselves with kegs and barrels stacked into every space that you can in this space. Now, of course, you're not open today, and so things will change by the time you actually open later in the week.
It's still tight,
but it's a small, very compact model. You're not. How much beer do you make every year?
I want to say we made like 300 to 500 barrels last year.
Yeah,
so pretty small.
It's a small production, and I imagine the first goal is serving this room that we're in and making sure the people that show up here are happy. But then I guess the product strategy past that is make some beers that can travel and that, create that kind of idea of what the brewery is so that it feels more interesting and more fun and more energetic for people that come here.
Yeah. I mean, it's a weird kind of balancing act, and I feel like we're still working on that, especially with the size we are. I feel if we were maybe even just slightly bigger, the option, and I feel like there's a thing about being exclusive, but there's a thing about being impossible, and that's something I feel like that we kind of struggle with sometimes, is trying to be an exclusive brewery and have people excited about our products, but we want to make sure people can still get our beer.
Yeah.
And that kind of can be a struggle sometimes, especially with us aging a barrel aged stout for 2 years and then heavily adjuncting it with coconut, and then today here's 200 bottles total.
Right.
And so when you take if we wanted to save some or give some to events or memberships or any of that, it all gets just eaten up pretty immediately. So we're constantly trying to, increase our barrel program, but obviously that is it's in its own limitations in itself. And maybe we'll get some storage here at some point.
Sure. You're limited by your own size, not your desire to be pretentious assholes about it all.
Jeez, I don't want to be a pretentious asshole, but
So, as you were formulating the idea for the 8th state, how did you think about a beer program that was going to work for this? You're also here in a market of Greenville. There's some other good breweries in town. Obviously, we've had Sean Johnson of Birds Fly South.
Yeah, great
on
dude.
On the podcast in the past. You needed to find a place and a way for you to fit in, but also for a way to stand out. How would you start thinking about that?
So originally the concept was, doing kind of sour forward or flavors that were kind of like the fruited sour kind of thing, but how did we put our own twist on it? So what you're actually drinking is a seltzer, and that seltzer has Kool-Aid, passion fruit, cherry, and pineapple in it.
Okay.
Just to let you know. The other two are sour.
It smells like it. Yeah.
Hey, I love tropical Kool-Aid, so.
Yeah.
But
there's a nostalgic factor to that where I think about childhood, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. But originally it was, hey, we were doing these kind of.
Oh my God, that's sweet. Oh my God. And then I want to pretend that I don't like it because of that, but I actually do.
We all pretend, and then we're like, okay, if it's juice, then it's juice. The next one you got blueberries, some cherries, some passion fruit, and then the other following sour has got some calamansi in it, as well as some melon, tayberry, and a couple other elements, just kind of playing around with citrus and berry profiles.
Sure.
Just kind of like the contrast. But with the sour program, originally that's kind of what people were gravitating towards, and we hadn't even attempted doing really many stouts or barley wines at that point in time. So people really were noticing us for that and doing kind of like hazy IPAs, and then we were going to be focusing more on wild beer, spontaneous kind of stuff, and kind of bridging those two kinds of different markets within wild beer. And that was going to be the goal for 8th State Brewing, and that did not happen. So
why didn't it happen?
Well, I mean, we still have the fruited sours, and that's really great, but the wild program, we kind of had to put on brakes just because
no one buys them.
Well, it's that, and the fact that we just have so much clean beer that if we infect any of it, then we're going to just lose a lot of money. But with the sour beers, originally, to kind of even pay a little homage to that, is they're all Solera. So with we have 2 5 barrels over here that are consistently Solera. And what we'll do is I'll have 5 different lactose strains, and then there's 3 different Saccharomyces strains. We'll do a brew day, and then we'll transfer it into there, and then let it ferment at ambient temperature, and then give it, since now it's a mother we've probably had it for over a year or 2 years at this point. We basically just keep Soleraing it and just feeding it, and then it does its thing, and it ends up being at about like an 8.5% sour beer beforehand, and then we'll fruit it down to do like the fruited sours that they're doing. It'll come down to like 6.5%. But that's kind of to keep a little more complexity within it. Something with like kettle sours that I find to be not in my taste is there's a lot of sulfur and kind of unfinished profiles. And that's literally because when you do kettle souring, you are halting a fermentation that is going on. And so when we do this in these tanks, lactose is a surface bacteria. It can go away. We can make that go away. We can't make Brett go away. We can't make PDO go away, but this is something that we can work with. And it kind of just makes me feel like I'm doing a little bit more of a service to that style of beer as opposed to just making a kettle soured quick turnover beer and then just pushing it out with kind of, off esters that we've seen in a lot of the fruited sours.
Sure. You just sneaky got us into talking about brewing fruited sours. I want to keep doing that because that's actually pretty fascinating that you're working in that kind of method. Before we do that, supply chain challenges are here to stay for a while. So why not trust the experts to handle freight for your ingredients? Old Orchard has partnered with a leading logistics firm in the craft beverage industry to transport your craft concentrate blends. When you order 2 pails or more of concentrate from Old Orchard, you qualify for freight quotes from various carriers and can stay up to date on the status of your shipment. To get started on a freight quote for craft concentrates today, head on over to oldorchard.com/brewer. Also, Brew Monitor from Precision Fermentation is the first real-time comprehensive fermentation monitoring solution. It works with your existing fermentation tanks to track dissolved oxygen, pH, gravity, pressure, temperature, and conductivity in real time from any smartphone, tablet, or PC. Brew Monitor provides detailed insight into your fermentations that helps improve beer consistency, reduce tank time, and increase overall efficiency, saving your brewery time and money. Get started for 30 days risk-free. Visit precisionfermentation.com/brewing. So yeah, let's talk about this long-term Solera.
What we have, again, we have the 2 5-barrel tanks, and depending on what our want or needs are in the tap room, what I will do is we'll have, say we have a tank 1 started off, and that tank is full. It has already sour made. While that tank is being used, we'll fill the other tank. So that one is maturing at the same time as this one's already ready to be used. Now, for example, these are in 1-barrel batch. Or
you just move a little bit of that over to kind of, just kick off the fermentation in the other vessel.
Right. And so what we'll do is we'll pull whatever we need over a couple of weeks. And then by that point in time, the second tank will have matured enough to where we can then refill it, because the first initial maturing, I think it took us about 3 months. And then every time before it's gotten a little bit shorter. So now we're at about a month for a maturation time to actually be completed, where it tastes, you'll get like nice green apple and pineapple kind of notes out of it before doing anything to it. And there's no sulfur compounds or any kind of like off notes. It's just sour beer.
Sure. Now imagine you're doing that in a totally oxygen-free environment. You're purging out in order to, just to keep that oxygen from driving that in a bad direction.
So any kind of transfers that we're doing it on CO2, pushing out through the racking arm. And then what we'll do is, add potassium metabisulfate or potassium sorbate or whatever into that with the fruit to make sure that any yeast or active yeast is kind of halted. And that's just to make sure that whenever people are crowlering these, they're shelf stable, which is, interesting that we have this whole kind of format. And
so you're not boiling that again to kill lacto then before you go through that fruiting process.
No, everything is active in that. Yeah. And so we actually have to do that. Otherwise, if people get some of our crowlers during the middle of the summer, they might blow up on them. Sure. Which is a normal thing for the fruited sour thing anyway.
Shouldn't be, but yeah.
But yeah, we're trying to make the best that we can to make everything shelf stable. Because we do enjoy these styles of beer, but we obviously have to be aware and mindful of each style and how it needs to be taken care of.
Oh, that makes sense. You shouldn't put that onus on the consumer around that kind of thing. You want people to be happy, and people aren't happy when their crowlers explode.
No, totally. And we don't want to see that either, because again, with us being tiny, we want as many people to experience what we're making as possible. So
right,
definitely
doesn't go over really well as a brewer. When you blame the consumer for the fact that this happens in the crowler that you filled. No consumers. Funny enough, they don't like that.
I didn't know. Just kidding.
You mentioned that you have a blend of 5 lacto strains. Talk to me about, or is that what you said?
It's 5 off the top of my head. There's like Plantarum, Del Brocchi, let's see. I literally would just have to go.
Yeah,
through a
that's okay.
list.
Yeah.
Like I've had it for so long, I just kind of forgot.
Why do it that way? And how did you make a decision about which strains to throw in there?
So originally going into it, it was ones that we had liked. Plantarum is a pretty straightforward profile, but then
Right.
having things like Del Brucki and I think it's Lacto Brevis as well, they add kind of other complex notes, but you're not going to really get those unless you let the lacto develop. And so it's kind of strange is sometimes people think there's Brett in our beer if before actually realizing that there's none in it at all. So getting those kind of like funky kind of esters and compounds that are not normally found except in wild beer is kind of fun. And I mean, I would be lying if like my favorite type of beer is lambic and goose.
Sure, sure.
If if I'm stuck on a desert island, that's what I want to be drinking. And unfortunately, it's not the easiest to get in South Carolina.
Sure. On that note, we're recording this 2 days after Armand de Belder passed away. Rest in peace, Armand. What a legend of the lambic and goose world. Such a beautiful tradition that he has helped shepherd on, and I just feel like I have to acknowledge that right now.
Oh yeah.
By the time people listen to this, it'll be months or weeks after that at least. But I do want to throw that out there. I like that idea though of building complexity even within what we might consider otherwise a quick sour or kettle sour beer. Clearly, it's not kettle soured. You've got a whole different process going along with that. But also it's not really mixed fermentation in that true mixed fermentation sense, since it's this kind of lactic thing. What yeast though then ends up doing the like heavy lifting on the fermentation for this?
Pretty much just there's a German ale strain, a Kolsch strain, and then a I want to say a Helles like lager strain. And those kind of at this point in time have turned into whatever they are.
And that's also living in this culture with the lactobacillus.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Yeah. It's turned out originally, a lot of it was just making sure that you're propagating and taking care of it from the initial part and, getting it to where we wanted the mother to be. And then that way, once it starts turning over, then we're just doing the same thing. And it's kind of the same mentality I would have for like wild beer. I'm not too much into fruited wild beer, but if I'm which we're gonna be doing, is why I say this, is a lot of just having our propagations in our specific cultures in different barrels and then repropping them and putting in those specific kind of cultures and making those the spotlights as opposed to putting crazy fruits. And also maybe at this point in time we can change the perspective on wild beer or help try to. I think that there's American wild producers such as Hill Farmstead that produce quality saisons and wild beer at affordable pricing that doesn't scare people away. And if we could do something like that, then that's all I ever want to do, because for such a style to be so amazing and for so little people to have access to it is like sucks.
Sure.
And I mean that's a hard enough style in itself anyway. But yeah, I mean, if we
some of it comes down to the way that American brewers have also marketed it, have created language around it, the way that the entire beer world in America has tried to make it feel like this special or different or separate thing. I know coming back from Belgium, it was the craziest thing in the world to be in the Brussels airport and be able to find like Oud Creek just in the airport. You're popping through. Like if I want to get a pastry and grab and go sandwich for lunch, I can grab and go a bottle of Oud Creek from like right there. I mean, we think of these as like different, weird, special, crazy things, and they don't need to be that way. These are just beers. They have great flavor in them. They're complex. There's nice fruity elements and flavor, but also kind of depth and bitterness and all these other things. A little bit of acidity and funky and
I mean, isn't it crazy that you can literally buy actual like gallons of like lambic and goose?
We treat it as rarefied thing, and it's just the beer,
Yeah.
Anyway, I think you're right. Like but at the same time, people drink beers with these they don't hate these flavors. People enjoy these flavors. We just seem to set it up to make people want to think that it's different, weird, hard, or they should have to do more research in order to be able to understand and get into this. It's almost like we set up this barrier that could potentially be artificial around this thing that makes it harder for people to want to like it because, well, this is sour. Even using the word sour is a terrible way to get somebody to interact and connect with a beer, because that feels polarizing, where if you call it tart, or has some acidity to it, and then here are these beers that have the similar acidity as a lot of wine that people may drink, and yet they don't call the wine sour. Acidity is acidity if it's balanced and with these other flavors than it was. Anyway, I'm going to jump off that soapbox and get your opinion on this.
I would completely agree with you. I mean, I think balance is kind of the goal, even with these like fruited sours. We're not trying to like, if people don't like sour beer, we want to make sure that maybe you might want to try a sour beer, or even get this be like your first stepping stone into getting into wild beer and into more kind of complex things. That I think that's going to be something this year that we're going to be working on a lot more of, and putting a lot more like saison out into the market. But that's also a weird thing too. I don't even know if I want to call it a saison, because that's been like bastardized to where like, if anybody,
this other brewer in town says saison is dead. I mean, I don't know. Yeah.
well, just like, I love saisons, but I feel like American culture has like either destroyed the word and turned it into something to where it's like, oh no, I don't want to drink a saison, or like, hey, I'm gonna have to drink like dirt or something, and you're like, no, like that's not it at all. But if that's how the public in general is viewing it, then maybe we have some work to do.
We can all take a page out of Boulevard's book, because they sell Tank 7, and it's a farmhouse ale, and they sell a ton of it, and it's a fantastic beer. And and it's not put up on some pedestal. It's sold in 4-packs is the way, to make it accessible for everybody. I totally agree with you on that. Let's talk a little bit about your fruit process. Clearly flavor is top of mind for you. You're very focused on how to achieve that kind of vivid flavor. And all of these have nice depth of flavor. They don't have, that kettle sour note, like we talked about, that sulfur note, that hot dog water, or that, that kind of, that weird, funky element that just makes them feel thin. Like they do have a nice heft to them. There's even a grainy heft. Like, we should actually talk about like what that base recipe looks like and how you build some beef to it. In fact, let's do that before we talk about fruit. What's the grist on that look like?
So actually it's modeled after like a Lambic beer.
We make our kettle sours like fruited Lambic.
It's like 60% like Pilsner, and then 30%
malted
wheat or unmalted wheat.
Yeah.
So, and then we've seen that it's given a nice body. We don't have to really do anything crazy. And then
I mean, Berliner Weiss or Lambic, there's a lot of commonalities in those things, right?
Oh yeah, totally. And then it kind of just turns into its own thing. And then we'll occasionally, if we want to bump up the sugar content, we'll just sometimes put Demerara, just if we want it to turn into like an imperial sour. Otherwise, we just kind of grain and then play with it.
Any special mashing prop? I mean, clearly you're not trying to go full on turbid mash or leave
just a higher mash, like 156. And we do that kind of with a lot of beers anyway. This table beer, how'd you like that IPA?
It was good.
That's a Cascade IPA.
Okay, Cascade.
Yeah.
Well, now you're distracting me from talking about fruit in these faster sour beers. And I do want to talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So with the fruit, this one right here is the collaboration I was telling you that we did it with the music label and Memorex Memories. That bottle over here on the counter is actually got a QR code where you can get the album as well.
Huh.
So it'll give you the album for like a purchase and stuff. So that's kind of fun to work with them on that. This has got a spirulina for the coloring in it.
Yeah.
And then it
is a blue-green color.
Oh yeah. And then that's got some Sauvignon Blanc late harvest grapes in it, some passion fruit, and a little bit of guava in it. Kind of to do just soft profiles with the tartness. You get a little bit of the spirulina in it, but it's kind of fun.
Yeah. Talk to me about your creative process when you're thinking about how to blend these things. You mentioned things like tayberry. You're using some, ingredients that may not be necessarily as common as some others in the general fruit and brewing lexicon. maybe not all available as aseptic puree from specific providers that
Yeah.
that might work for larger production breweries. Talk to me about like how you think about blending these kinds of fruit ingredients, and then how you go about actually doing that.
So a lot of it is one, if there's any ideas that we have involved in our head that might be fun, like a cobbler style beer, how do we make that happen? And I think that's kind of where and I would say the same thing for us approaching stout beer as well, is having like some sort of food and gastronomy background is pretty important, and understanding what you want out of something.
Right.
And so like they're not really like simple answers. They're small tweaks to make something happen. But when it comes to like fruiting, we want something like I was saying with the berries and the citrus. Those are two profiles that can be really complementary. And they could be placed in any point in time of the season, right? So whether this is winter, whether this is springtime, those two things, because one's not supposed to be there, it will always work, right? But also,
what do you mean by that? Because it's not supposed to be there, it'll
like
work.
You're not really going to be drinking like passion fruit in the middle of winter, but I am, because I like passion fruit. And,
Yeah.
I like, rum cocktails and stuff. So if I can put myself and transport myself onto an island, then there's that. But then also coming back into springtime, when you have, again, like cobbler beers where it's like blueberry, raspberry, and blackberry, and just jammy forwardness. And I don't really think of it as like a springtime thing. I think of that more as like fall, and me like with my grandparents, or,
Sure.
those kind of like warm feelings. And so like nostalgia kind of comes into play. So putting the two together kind of just puts it a little like oddly complacent, but balanced.
Yeah.
So that's why a lot of the like random fruit combos are like that. But if they're pinpointed, kind of like this bottle, we'll think of an actual idea. So like
there's some juxtaposition, that's meant to elicit some kind of like jarring curiosity to it, where it's not just exactly the thing you might expect. There are notes in there that are going to play against each other, and maybe create a little bit of a tension, in that, in order to create some drama.
Yeah, I mean, that's funny you say that. We've actually, so one time we did yuzu, and then we did a fermented coffee that was fermented for I think 5 days, and it has profiles of like raspberry and cherry. So we did yuzu, guava, the coffee, and I want to say like vanilla. And the crazy thing is that it tasted like cherry coffee with like pininess into it. And so the profile itself is really fun and interesting and tastes good, but for some people that might be like too weird. But at the same time, if we don't try it, then you're never going to know what it tastes like.
Those fruit and coffee kettle sours are, I know I was talking to Alex Flores of Urban South about that, because they do a drip series like that too. Trying to find new, interesting ways to explore these kinds of flavors. Now, that's really cool. When it comes to method of using things, how do you work? Again, you're on a small system. You don't need to think about what's going to work in a 60-barrel tank. You've got the ability to use smaller amounts of ingredients and really get creative with it. What does that typically look like for you?
Well, if it's bad, then we just dump it.
Right.
So that's a little easy to do. But
even quantities of fruits, you can find smaller quantities of things and potentially use those.
It does make it a little easier to do, because if you're doing 20 or 30 barrels of a specific fruit, that's a lot different than doing 5 or 2 barrels of it.
Sure.
So it does.
Don't tell anybody I just finished all of that.
Hey, don't.
I'm gonna lose my credibility by drinking all of that fruited sour.
It had gin staves in it too.
Gin staves.
What? Yeah. And then we got this is a double IPA. It's kind of coming on like 6 weeks, but it's still holding up nice. And we got a little amber lager for you.
Uh-oh.
You could call this not Yingling. How about that?
Keep trying to distract me from the fruit thing. Let's talk about these fruits.
With the fruits. Sorry, I'm just trying to go through this flight of 12 beers that I handed you.
We haven't even gotten to the stouts, but we'll get to those too.
So with the fruiting though, we do use a couple different fruit producers. We use a local kind of fruit company, and whatever they kind of have available, we'll just kind of do. But then if we're planning something out, what we'll do is, I'll give them a couple weeks head notice, or if we need to order it from online, because there's honestly I mean, I think we've probably used
When you're ordering fruit, are you ordering puree? Are you ordering whole fruit, frozen fruit?
For these specifically, for fruited sours like that, there's just, for the lack of people and manpower, it's not even worth trying to buy it as whole fruits. Now, on that being said, with the wild beers and stuff like that, we'll hand process figs and peaches, and that's no problem. There's just a different methodology and kind of mentality, right, to these types of beers. So if you can kind of think of each style of beer as like an individual person, then that's maybe the best way to approach them, right? So with this, we're doing purees, but we'll try to kind of, venture out like Lilo fruit, or it's kind of fun sometimes using like cantaloupe with things. We found that like using like cantaloupe and then like passion fruit and almost making like a tropical punch and having that kind of slight bitterness can really help make it more drinkable.
How do you use cantaloupe?
They
don't sell cantaloupe puree, do they?
They do.
Oh, they do.
Yeah, they do.
Oh, well, hey.
So yeah, we'll just get a puree of that, and but again, we won't really know until we're there. But that's another interesting point too, is that we rarely, if not ever, use lactose in actually most of our beer, unless that's what the collaborator wants to do, and then by all means we'll do that. But I mean, so they're not on draft right now, but we've been kind of like doing ones where we play with like almond milk or oat milk and stuff, and we'll fruit them the same, right? We did one with our friends up at Newgrass, and it's got almond milk, vanilla, ground vanilla, as well as it was blueberries, blackberries, I want to say peaches, and some other, is like basically a berry cobbler type of thing, to put some cassia bark with it, and you get these full-bodied elements, this creaminess like berries and cream, and none of it's all vegan friendly, and it doesn't do any weird like coagulation or weird head retention either. So having those kinds of things in it is really kind of reassuring too, where you can make products like actually full-bodied and actually kind of creamy, and you can still have a full audience be able to enjoy it. I mean, that's honestly why we make such a wide array of styles, and why we carry everything here, is to be like, well, me, one, as a person, is, hey, I make beer, I don't live beer, I like cocktails, I like other things that aren't beer, and maybe that helps me influence beer. And so if we can kind of bridge those gaps, or get people that don't want to go to a brewery to come to a brewery, then we're doing our job, because they can be like, hey, you don't like beer? That's fine. Well, what about hard seltzer, or what about wine, or what about mezcal or bourbon, or what about, this draft cocktails or whatever? And how about that? And actually trying to bridge these gaps and show people that maybe they do want to try this stuff, but they didn't maybe have the right opportunity, or weren't given the right tools to really assess what they're being presented with. I mean, I feel like a lot of this stuff can be overwhelming for people, especially people that aren't even involved in craft beer, and what their first perspective on beer is, and how I think we've all how to convince somebody into drinking craft beer. And it's doable. You just have to understand what they want.
That's an interesting one. I hadn't really thought about it, but yeah, you've got your tap lineup right there below your bourbon selection here in the brew pub, with a pretty phenomenal selection of bourbon too.
Thank you.
But it also sets all those things on the same stage. It doesn't make apologies for, fruited, quicker sours. It doesn't say, well, these are just, beers that shouldn't be taken seriously. They should be taken just as seriously as all the other beverages here on your menu, because you craft them well. I think that's a nice way to say it. And a lot of brewers maybe don't even treat their own beers that way, especially when they're, putting a like kids cereal box, label on it, and, playing that kind of juvenile element to it. I think some of these certainly have more complexity of flavor, and should be, playing in that tiki cocktail place that's campy, but it's also got class to it too, rather than just the purely juvenile thing to it.
Yeah. And I mean, that's, a really interesting point that you make. A lot of this is like, our art has a lot of kind of retro feelings to it, but a lot of it is kind of feeling nostalgic in places, but also trying to make something new out of it. I mean, there is something to be said about respecting the past while also appreciating the future.
Sure.
I mean, if you're not doing either, then I don't know. I mean, maybe that should be something you should talk to yourself about, because I find it's been really beneficial for me to look at it. And like, it's so strange sometimes, with talking with some of our artists, I'll be like, hey, can you craft this can? And I'll show the tunnel speed can, or, hey, can you make me feel like warm? Like, how do you get the feeling of when somebody like hits a old synthesizer and it feels like it's being played on like a record player, like that, like crackling, those kinds of elements? Like, how do I make that into
fat
beer?
analog bass and those yeah.
Like, how do I put those into beer? And maybe that's where art can kind of help bridge that and fully make it. But I don't know, it's important to the whole creative process, and maybe gets people more excited about it too.
Sounds like the best creative briefs ever. Let's talk a little bit more about that before we do that. From the rotatable pickup tube on Rogue Brewing's pilot brew house to the integrated hop backs on Sierra Nevada's twin prototyping brew houses, SS Brewtech has taken technology they invented, working with world-renowned industry veterans, and made them available to every craft brewer. To learn more about SS Brewtech's innovation list, head on over to ssbrewtech.com. Also, if you're looking for a direct partnership with an independent hop grower who's as fanatical about flavor and quality as you are, join the revolution. Hop Revolution's only reason for being is sustainably farming and processing New Zealand's most flavorsome hops. They get that great beer is not brewed to a past or a future ideal. It's an ongoing journey of fresh thinking. Hop Revolution really is only here for your beer. Let them flavor your thinking stateside directly from Hop Revolution or through Crosby Hops or Mill 95. Learn more at hoprevolution.co.nz. That's hoprevolution.co.nz, or drop in for a chat at CBC booth 1811. I love that CBC is happening in person again. I'm so excited that we're going to be able to do that up in Minneapolis in May. And of course, SS Brewtech, you've got a whole bunch of their equipment right here, Cam.
Oh, a lot of it.
Yeah, a lot of it. A lot of it. Everything from tanks to, some bigger tanks to even some of their small tanks and glycol chillers.
Yeah, we got eight uni tanks, one bright tank, and then we have the 3 glycol chillers. Actually, maybe 4 glycol chillers, because there's the one in the closet.
Oh, okay.
And then we also have the 1 barrel fruiting tank, so there's 8 of those. So
all right,
we have a lot of SS Brewtech stuff.
There you go. There you go. Well, let's talk about stouts. We've got a few of those left. Obviously, when you look at the world of Untapped and what the beer nerds and whatnot, love the most from you, that's certainly the thing. Last year at CBC, you sat on a panel talking about brewing adjunct stouts and that kind of thing. It's certainly something that people want to talk to you about. It's something that I want to talk to you about. I can't let you get out of here by trying to put lagers in front of me. Okay. I'm not going to fall for that kind of distraction tactic. I appreciate you trying. But let's talk about the kind of foundation of a stout program and what got you into making these, and then how you decided to set yourself apart in the world of stouts. Very, very competitive world. There's a smaller number of fans that are so fixated on that style, and they've got to be good to make a mark.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. We kind of entered. Well, so this right here is actually a coffee and vanilla barley wine that we did with Bottle Logic, with like Brandon and Wes in them. Yeah, they came out, and I mean, I think that's probably our 3rd or 4th beer with them. We've known them for many years at this point. Yeah. Originally we did like a holiday kind of coffee for it. Not that it has actual holiday spices, but pretty straightforward. But this plays more into kind of our traditional grain bill for our barley wines. Our most recent,
heavy chocolate component to this barley wine.
And I want to say that's probably has to do with the coffee coming from the Mostra coffee.
Monster coffee. Yeah.
Yeah. And basically, Mike just made a custom blend on it, and then we
it's a Mostra or Mostra.
Potato. We can ask Mike though if you want to.
I should do that at some point here so I get it correct. Yeah.
But this one kind of came out fun. It really does remind me of like a coffee latte.
Yeah.
We do a lot of pretty low carbonation on any of our dark beers. Some people aren't really a huge fan of that. I personally am. I think that we have like a silkiness and a nice mouthfeel to our beers. And I've noticed that if they get carb too much, then you're losing that.
Hmm.
And so I almost just do the bare minimum on carbing, and that suffices to what I'm looking for in a beer. So to some people, they're like, I don't like flat beer or close to flat beer, and that's fine, but that's not our goal for what I'm trying to make. If I mean, I do appreciate it, but sometimes I just, I mean, you can tell these are pretty flat beers, but and maybe if we poured them off
it
draft,
lends it almost like a coffee liqueur kind of element, although it's certainly not as hot as a coffee liqueur might be. But it's more spirit than it is beer at some point.
Yeah, and it's interesting trying to kind of model a stout beer because, like you're saying, going back to what we started, I really don't even know how I got into stout beer in a weird way. I was making small batches and then we had put them into small barrels, and then people were always like, blah, blah, you got to make it like super thick and all this stuff. And I have never even had any of those beers, so I don't even know what I'm comparing it to. And all I can really do is just be like, all right, I'm going to take whatever tips you all have as best as possible to, get what you're getting out of it, and maybe we'll just make something good out of it. And, we did have some like friends in the industry kind of lend us some pointers into what to do. But really they were like, boil the beer until you can't read it. And we're like, okay.
Yeah.
And so that is what we did. And then I ended up putting Piece of Future, and then we made basically the barley wines that you're looking at. They're modeled after like Brew 2000. So Brew 2000 was what I didn't like.
And that's
barley
Fremont's Brew 2000.
Yeah. I didn't like barley wine until I had that, and then I realized that that's something I really wanted to pursue. So that's what got me to model that. So we threw
that is a fantastic beer. It is also a past craft beer and brewing beer of the year.
It's a pretty amazing beer.
It's pretty amazing.
I had a 1000 a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
Still holding up great.
Nice.
But yeah, having that like friends that knew what they were wanting out of it, and then basically just trusting me to adjunct it. So the two beers I'm actually talking about are Neck and Neck and then Piece of Future, which are, I think, arguably what kind of really got us moving forward or somewhat noticed. And it's really funny is that we had probably the same amount of Neck and Neck bottles that we'd have for a regular bottling run that we are currently doing, but it took it like 2 weeks to sell out.
Sure.
And nobody wanted it
because nobody knew. right.
And then suddenly it was like, wow, this is crazy what people are like. What?
right.
But I mean, basically, I adjuncted this barrel aged beer that we had in a small format barrel, adjuncted with coconut, macadamia nut, chocolate, and vanilla, just because that's what I wanted out of a beer. And then I just had my friends send it to people, and this is when I guess people were more helpful with online and stuff, and it really made more of an impact.
Back when people were more helpful online.
I'm not saying it like negatively. I'm just saying, again, with how beer has changed itself, and I don't want to use influencers because these people are my friends. So I don't.
Sure.
It's weird connotations, and so I don't really know how to approach talking about
it.
But at the point in time, my friend was like, look, I'm going to send them these beers, and they're not going to just promote your stuff. If they legitimately like it, they'll probably post something. But if they don't like it, like, that's just what it is.
Right.
And then they'd all started being like, wait, I legitimately like this. And then we put out our membership program, and then things from there kind of started picking up. But, it's, again, weird because of how small we are is why I feel like we got so much attention in a weird way.
Yeah.
Because it was so much scarcity involved, and it's not that we wanted it to be that way. It was more like, I just need to make some money as a small brewery. Here's our bottles. And then
right.
Did not expect anything like this to happen. And but on the other hand, so that's really when that kind of turning point started to happen. And we started producing more stout beer, and then I started dialing in different stout recipes. And then, the barley wine, I think we had it to a point where I was really happy with it. And just, we only used like 1 or 2 different recipes just because I think that that's something that is just, we don't really need to mess with too much. And then we started phasing out doing like, wild beer, turbid mash, spontaneous stuff, because this was just taking over everything at that point in time.
Right.
And people were lining up in our parking lot at 2 or 3 in the morning, and it was just really weird, like just totally surreal stuff that I didn't really think like we would be capable of producing. But I mean, I'm thankful for it all.
Sure.
I mean, if it wasn't for that, I don't think we'd be talking. So.
Probably not. But having said that, it's not, with all of these, there are plenty of other people that are also making these styles of beers and aren't hitting in that kind of way, or aren't finding the same kind of audience that is expressing demand for it. There's some that are making the same kind of quantities. There are plenty of people, the reason why, sometimes people just, it's the right time, it's the right place. And there's just this kind of confluence of, of experience and incident that, that leads to these kinds of things. I mean, it's the same thing in the music world where, why does one singer become popular at this point? Sometimes it's just the right moment for the right song that gets to the right DJ that, gets out in the right kind of, sphere. At some point you can try to put take a scientific approach and figure out exactly why. But having said that, I think there's something to it, and that probably does come back. There is this kind of flavor through line through all the beers that you make, whether they're stouts or whether they're fruited sour beers, and it's actually a clever and strategic approach to building flavor that's probably rooted in that kind of culinary background that you have working in food for so long, and being able to taste things in a certain way and being able to understand how those flavors interact with each other. It's not just an accident, and it's not just a laundry list of I'm going to pull these ingredients and do this thing with it. It's also knowing what kind of qualities you want out of some of those ingredients, and then thinking about, quantities or sourcing or those other pieces that go into it so that you get exactly the flavors that you want out of those. And then as you taste it, figuring out how to dial it into exactly the right thing, the same way the chef would as they're preparing a dish, working through that kind of creative process.
That is Ghost Anise. That's a banana and coconut stout. The other stout I was going to tell you about, which kind of a little more even pertains to what's going on. This is Stress Stream. It's a collab that we did with Fidens. And that's got strawberry, a passion fruit wash, Colombian coffee, as well as caramel, coconut, chocolate, and vanilla. And
that's a mouthful.
Yeah, it is a lot, but at the same time, it's in a way a play on a Neapolitan, so more of a simple thought if you think of it that way. I get a lot of like waffle cone, like strawberry waffle cone notes in it, and that's kind of where the coffee is playing in. But this is a really good example of kind of what you're talking about in terms of like dialing in things or making things have multiple layers. So the strawberry aspect of this beer, we fermented it on strawberry. So for us, whenever we have to brew a stout, it takes us 2 days to brew, which is in a weird way a good thing. Because what this allows us to do is that on our first day, we can continue a fermentation that can handle complex sugar chains. And then whenever we introduce simple sugars into it, there won't be any stalling on the second day.
Right.
So on our second day, what we're doing is we're knocking out on like strawberry. And then what we'll do is let it ferment. And what you'll do is you'll get faded notes of strawberry coming out, and the notes almost even more aromatic than anything. Then what we'll do is we'll come back with like a freeze dried strawberry and then add that in cold side to kind of create a fuller profile of the strawberry. And we did the same thing with another like Bottle Logic collab as well, where we ferment on the fruit first and then add another layer of fruit in cold side to give different elements of it, to also create a fuller picture of what you're maybe more familiar with.
Kind of explain this to me, exactly in technical terms, how you're doing that.
So we're essentially we're almost making like a giant starter.
Sure.
in
sure.
a weird way.
But it's not a smaller beer. You're doing this with the stout itself.
Yeah, we're doing with the
Okay.
stout itself, and so if there's any sugars that are added, we make sure to not add them on the first day. And that's kind of funny
Oh,
because
so you're basically you're not doing the same mash in 2 days. You're actually doing a slightly different mash and then kind of building this additive beer in the tank.
So, like, for example, say if you had a stout that required like Demerara sugar, because that's
Sure.
what the person wanted to have in the notes of it. So instead of us doing like 50 pound or 25 pounds and 25 pounds in a batch, we would just do 50 pounds on the second day.
Yeah.
And then it'll average out the starting gravity.
Right.
And
But you make that yeast work on that first day's batch so that it's building up.
and then
Sure.
it has no issues fermenting, because we have had that issue where we and this happened on a beer called Nucleosynthesis, and it had a super high starting gravity, but we made the mistake of brewing it and putting the sugars in, the simple sugars in on the day of, and then I had to like recirculate it and reoxygenate it multiple times, which was kind of scary because risking infection.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, the yeast company was like, yeah, that's a really high gravity, and you're gonna need to like reoxygenate your wort in order for this to even continue fermenting. So we, needless to say, learned to not do that again. But again, it's been easy enough because it basically, instead of us having to make a beer in 1 day and double batching it and spending, you could have the same person brewing the beer over 2 days and it'll be fine.
It's so funny because, it was recently we were talking to Urbain Couteau from Stroysa Brewers, and they brew a lot of, 16, 17, 18% beers. And they do that over 4 days and fill one tank over 4 days. And he does a modified kind of, step mash temperature deal. Same kind of thing where it's the hottest temperature is that first batch. And each successive batch then changes in temperature, but the hardest to ferment is that first batch for the same reason that you talk about, that you're making your yeast do the work and getting used to that work early on so that it doesn't stall out when it gets to, when you then feed it easier stuff. Yeah, no, that's kind of fascinating.
Yeah. It's weird is like Yepa one day told me something I think as a really good example into how to view adjuncting your beer.
That's Yepa from Evil Twin.
Yeah. And he basically was just like, use ingredients how you would use them in real life. So if you were to use something like if you were trying to make like a tiramisu or a creme brulee or whatever, like apply those heat or non-heat elements into it to pull out the flavors that you're wanting. Otherwise, you might be risking the ideas of like tannic profiles coming out of weird. I don't even really want to call them adjuncts because like they're not adjuncts. Like a coconut is an adjunct. Like, and that's a weird.
It's an ingredient.
It's a weird brewer like thing where like you're like stop saying that, like it's not adjuncted with fruit, like it's just fruited. But I don't want to correct somebody because that's just mean, but
sure.
But again, the point being is that if I want like candy bars in a beer, well, do you ever bake candy bars? And you're like, no, I guess I don't. And you might want to just leave those cold, or seriously.
Makes sense.
And if you have a pasteurizer, then you can put anything into your beer and it's fine.
Yeah.
But like, otherwise, sometimes if I put in, like, we made the mistake one time where I put in astronaut ice cream sandwiches, and I put that in cold side rather than hot side, not thinking about the fact that there's lactocultures in the ice cream sandwiches. And then what it did was it created a sour stout beer.
Oh.
So that was fun. So we had to recall that beer. But I mean, again, process things that you're not going to realize until you do them.
So then now we get back to that. And let me walk through this again. You do this beer with strawberry, a stout with strawberry in it. And so you're brewing that first day, you're boiling, you knock that out, and then you it's not a continuous boil, it's just 2 long boils in order to do that. But then, then on that second day, as you knock out into it, you're then adding strawberries somewhat close to that knockout point so that you've got simple sugar in there along with this new batch that has its sugar and that can now work through all of that quickly right then?
Yeah, correct.
That's a cool idea. So you're adding fruit while the yeast is still active. Then you're almost biotransforming your fruit in your stouts.
Yeah, it's weird. Like, I used to get scared about fermenting with stouts or like fermenting fruit with stouts, but then I realized that as long as fermentation just eats so much flavor out of everything.
Yeah.
And so if anything, you're almost getting like essences out of the fermentation. So even if you load it up on fruit puree, you're still going to ferment it out for the majority. And then it's going to just leave this kind of like berry essence or, apricot or whatever it's kind of going on. But it's not wild beer. So there's not going to like, if you have strawberry where it could turn potentially plastic, and if you're not doing the kind of like flushing that correctly or doing the right kind of fermentation with strawberry, with wild beer, always comes out bad. But there's some people that know how to work with fruits and it comes out like strawberries.
Sure.
And so there's kind of the same thought process with making the stout beer or just any kind of thing is, be conscious of what ingredients you're using. So maybe do a bare minimum research on it and then apply it. And then what you do is look at what you know and then start from there. So with the coffee, I have like, we'll add X amount of coffee or we'll add X amount of vanilla and we'll add whatever coconut. And we let all of those things circulate with this beer. And then I came back after the weekend, after everything had circulated, and I'd pulled coffee and it was still providing some like astringency that maybe I wasn't too fond of. So that's when you have to just come to terms with yourself that, one, I'm fine with this and I'm going to just release it, or two, we need to add something else to this to get it to where we want it to be. And so I added more coconut to help round out the profile, but also add more of that kind of like ice cream kind of mouthfeel. And those are things that you have to just be mindful of with the whole building process, is that don't get too caught up on exact numbers. Get have place points, but really be open to the idea of changing and adjusting on the fly to create something. Because if you're not, then you're just going to keep ending up with products that you may not be happy with, or maybe your customer views as average. And for somebody like ourselves, I really can't afford to just be average because we're so small. And so we have to stand out in any kind of way that we can. So
Sure. You mentioned before that you then, even after this initial fruit puree fermentation in here, that on the cold side, then, and is there any specific yeast that you use to work through some of these big stouts, or is it just?
I just use California ale yeast.
Hey, it's pretty common.
Yeah. I mean,
it does the job. It's pretty neutral.
Workhorse neutral.
Gets the high ABVs and
exactly. Yeah. I mean, we used to do super yeast, but the weird thing about that is that it stalled a lot more than
interesting. Yeah.
They were like promoting it to be a higher yeast or like higher attenuation, and then I get better attenuation results with just Cali. So I'm like, yeah, you might, or you could just use like Safal, and that'd be totally fine too. I mean, especially if you're on, I wouldn't even say budget. It's really just what are you looking for? Because I know plenty of professional homebrewers that are using dry yeast and making kick-ass beer. So like, there's no stigmas behind it.
Sure.
It's more just what do you want out of your beer?
Right. Are there any tricks to the fermentation in terms of temperature to kind of control esters? You're definitely pushing fruity flavors in here, and so maybe are you trying to optimize for those? Are you trying to keep it neutral before you add those?
If you can aim in the lower 60s, then it'll just keep it clean. But I have noticed that sometimes we will add. We'll start at a slightly higher, and you'll pull out some banana notes. And that can be kind of fun, like with that Ghost in You that you had with the banana beer. There was some already. Oh, actually, you know what? We fermented that stout on a banana yeast, the Omega banana yeast or Bonanza or whatever. just to see what it would do, and then added banana to it.
leaning in. Yeah.
But no, it was just kind of fun because we were like, I mean, we might as well try it. And then it's just draft only. So it was cool to have a draft only stout that people, if they travel, can be like, hey, I got something unique.
Right.
But yeah.
Even more rare than rare because you can't even trade it.
Yeah.
Wow. Whoa. So then on the cold side, you do some additional conditioning, and you might pull out, like double up on some of these ingredients to help achieve some sort of pop or add another layer of that same fruit or flavor to it.
Yeah, we'll do that. And I'll also, if there's any kind of like sugars or fermentables, we also do the same thing to our stouts as we would to our fruited sours. And that's just to make sure that there's no weird, because again, after the issue that we had with the lactobacillus in the one beer, we want to make sure that nothing is happening. Even if our process changes have changed entirely, I still don't want to risk anything.
Right.
If we had a flash pasteurizer, then we would probably be a little more adventurous, which is to some people would be like, is that
where will you go if you're more adventurous than this?
And I'm like, oh, well, there's a lot of places, but the other part of me is like, well, maybe this is a good thing. So
Sure.
Are you sure you don't want barrel aged candy bars? Like, well, kind of. I like Twix.
When you're adding some of these ingredients, and I'm not going to call them adjuncts, I'm going to call them ingredients. Coconut, and the like, and coffee. You are adding straight to the tank. You're not doing a smaller, higher concentration maceration that you're then blending back into the tank. You're not using a recirculation kind of method. You're just popping them in. Or?
No. So we actually have a hop back.
Okay, cool.
So I think having a hop back or any sort of recirculation is going to be crucial for anybody producing adjuncted beer. I said it. I'm just kidding. No. So basically, what we have seen, and I think a lot of people like Cigar City have proven.
Sure.
Is that if you recirculate
Cigar City's Spinbot, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Spinbot.
Yeah, the Spinbot. If you have circulate your ingredients, you're able to get more surface area covered, and you're able to get a better profile in a shorter amount of time. And so that's been, we've been fortunate enough to have some really cool people in the industry that have given us tips in how to use them, also in terms of how to build it. But really, it's just a hop back with the pressure, being on it. And that if you can keep it under pressure and circulate it, you're fine. As long as it doesn't get too, once you get over 10 PSI, you might want to start letting pressure out somewhere on one of the ends and then just trying to keep it balanced. But that happens. The aeration will happen if, like, say I'm transferring it and then here's the adjunct. And then if the port in which it's coming out is maybe like an inch or so above it, and then you'll start seeing it degas itself. But that's something that happens over a course of a couple days. So it's not like you can't monitor it. Just having circulation in general has been really crucial for us. Basically, we have to dose our tanks a couple times, usually with coconut. So instead of putting in, as you can see, those are the tops on them that we would have to go through. So we used to put coconut through the top and hang it on our spray ball, and then put the bag down in there with the coconut, and then just kind of let it hang out. Then we'd have to pull it out from the top and get on like a step stool or whatever and pull that out. And those end up turning into like, from 25-pound bags to 50-pound bags that you're then reaching in a couple feet to pull out. And it was just dangerous.
Sure.
One thing for me to be complaining and like, oh, wow, this is, I don't want to do it. But it's another thing to be like, our employees could get legitimately hurt if they're not doing this correctly. So, obviously a safety thing was a real important thing in trying to come up with what to do. And then, talking with Bottle Logic, they were like, you should just make a hop back, convert it, and just start putting your adjuncts into that. And then you'll circulate on them over a couple of days. There's a couple coconut only takes a couple of days to extract. Chocolate only takes a couple of days to extract. Coffee can take hours to a day to extract. like those kinds of things.
But the net of increasing that efficiency
Yeah.
of the extraction also means you're using less ingredients. That means less absorption, which means you're also losing less of this very expensive liquid
Oh, I mean,
on a small scale for a brewery like this. Every ounce that you can, you save is money.
to prove the point that or add to the point that you're making is that if I was pulling out a bag of coconut that weighed 50 pounds and then squeezing it as much as I can, that's going to get nowhere near as much out as me putting it in a hot back and then putting CO2 pressure on it into where almost all of that liquid comes out, except for maybe what's in one of the hose lines, which is, a beer, but a beer compared to 5 beers or 10 beers is pretty significant. Again, like what you're saying is, if these bottles are over $20 for a bottle, that's a significant amount of money for us. So,
right.
Yeah. If we can figure
one bottle's worth versus 10, that's a couple $100 a beer. Right?
Yeah. I mean, some people are like, oh yeah, you're only saving like 12 bottles. And I'm like, 12 bottles is actually a significant amount of money.
When you're releasing 12 bottles is a lot of bottles.
Yeah. And it does become infinitely more important to do that. I actually finally just bought us a flow meter, which will, the more knowledge that you can know about your beer, the better it will always be. I think that's a weird thing to be said about professional brewing is that, making a step from home brewing to brewing at a professional level, even on this scale, the quality differences are significant. And there's no way of even, like, unless you really understand beer, there's no way you could make that kind of stuff at home. Or if you have a bunch of money, then that's another thing. But at that point, you might as well just make a brewery because the shit costs like similar pricing. So you're like, all right, well, instead of making that 1 barrel batch, you could probably make like 5 or 3 or whatever, or half.
We've had that same conversation with folks where, like, even Tom from Antidote, like, it's his homebrewing hobby turned into a professional brewery because they were homebrewing too much beer. They couldn't drink it all, but they wanted to keep making it. So you have to find a way to sell it. No, it totally makes sense.
I love their beer so much.
Let's talk about left field ingredients in some of your big barrel aged beers. Talk to me about the one of the more interesting or out there ingredients that you used and how you got interesting or good results out of it.
So I would say that, and we haven't done it in a barrel aged beer, but I think I would like to, is chamomile.
Chamomile.
Yeah. So we did a beer called Old Gods. It's a barley wine. It's got coconut, chamomile, and vanilla in it. And it's like a bergamot ice cream, like citrus, orange, coconut, like really pleasant. I've never thought I would really like that until I just started making it, and that came out really good. We also did and I think what got me inspired by that was we worked with a local restaurant called Bar Mar. Basically, they did a Vietnamese coffee, and so their desserts, it's just phenomenal. So they make this chicory syrup that goes into it, and it's when you try it, there's so much coffee and your heart starts like racing.
Nice. Yeah.
And so we put this like chicory coffee syrup in it, vanilla, some coconut, and then the cardamom, and it became one of, I think, my favorite beers I think we've like ever made. And it's weird to say that because it's a non-barrel aged beer, but at the same time, the depth of flavor and what's coming out of it is so unique but pleasant that like it's something you don't realize you crave in something until you have it. So I think the cardamom and like the chamomile kind of mixes, those are really fun ingredients to have. Obviously they can be overwhelming, but playing with them again with restraint and slowly building it. Like if you're not familiar with it, why not err on the side of less? Because you can always add more. And so, yeah, I mean, with the chamomile, I would just tea it and then put it in, and then ta-da. I would put the concentrate of it, and then since it's already been boiled, it's sanitized. So then put that in a bag and put it in, let it sit for a few days, circulate it on the coconut, and then ta-da. Here's magic barley wine.
Right.
And then I don't know that I've adventured too much with the stout stuff, because that's a really weird point to make. Is that when you start getting too weird with stout beer, uh, people don't necessarily get excited.
Right.
They're like, this seems weird. Like, I don't know that I want to
Sure.
drink this. And so, and
We've gone off the other half, Thai banana, diving board and into that swimming pool. People are kind of okay with that, even though those tend to not be the most highly prized of the things that they do.
Yeah. We did like a hummingbird cake stout, and that's like pineapple, banana, pecans, vanilla, I don't know, a bunch of stuff that
Sure.
people would be like, oh, and like allspice and stuff. So it was very polarizing for people, but at the same time it tasted like a hummingbird cake, and we use hummingbird cakes in it, so that's a win for hummingbird cakes.
Yeah, I think, in that regard, it works just the same way that you mentioned. It's almost what Yepa said. Use it in the way that, you'd use it in food. And you guys there's chocolatiers and bakers and pastry makers and everyone else to look at, and the way that those things get used with chocolate, because all the flavors that work in stouts with these also work in chocolates, in a very, very similar way. Let's zoom out a little bit and talk to me about what the bigger picture looks like for Eighth State. What's next in the short run, and what's the big long-term goal for this project that started as a broader creative outlet and is now focused on brewing?
Well, right now, we're currently obviously trying to operate within the means that we are, but I would like to ultimately have, like a 15-barrel system, working with like the 3-barrel system, because again, like we were talking about with different markets and different people, there's no point in making a giant amount of imperial stout if only a certain segment of your audience wants that. Now, on the other hand, when we have lager beer and we have IPAs, whether or not anybody knows us for lager beer or IPAs, that's still going to be one of our top sellers. So I would like to continue to build that as a brewery and, show that we are a well-rounded brewery overall. And that does involve increasing into different markets, but more in the reason of being like, hey, we're going to do draft around Greenville and maybe a couple accounts in like Charlotte or whatever, and be really strategic with that and making sure that the packaged products that we're doing are either going to accounts that are friends or they're going directly from us. I want to make sure that whatever connections that we are doing with people that are selling our beer is that they're people that care about our beer, as opposed to just going to take it and do whatever they want with it. And that's kind of why we don't put beer out there to begin with.
Sure.
Is because so many people don't understand how to use a fruited sour. So why would I send this into a market, one, when you're going to complain about the pricing on it, and then two, complain that you can't use the keg because you don't understand what the beer is. So rather than even giving them that option, I will just give you, straightforward styles, but still try to increase our audience broader and still basically make sure that each audience is thought of and considered when we are growing. So like, I want you to view the stouts as like, we're not just blowing up. This is going to stay probably about the same. We're trying to get a bigger facility. We want to have a destination location. We want to really bring in that kind of environment and like a creative environment. So ultimately I would like to be have a destination location, have a tap room, maybe have satellite locations that are very specifically located and very small, dig deeper, not further. If we can do that, then I kind of will be happy with what we're doing. Have a cool brewery, have a cool tap room, have maybe a tap room in Seattle because because the laws are good and we have an owner there or something, right? So it's like, hey, this connection actually makes sense instead of being like, hey, we're just showing up.
Sure.
But I would love for if to expand on all the elements in this place that you see, going from the art aspect to the bourbon program to, us doing rum or agricole kind of cocktails, to having a wine list that's thought out, to, feeling at home in a space that's not at home. And like, how do you make a big structure feel like that? And those are kind of weird challenges that I want to experience. And I want other people to like get on board with, like, who's going to get mad at plants? Like, that's pretty awesome.
It's true. That's true. And it kind of speaks to that whole idea of the eighth state and finding that sense of community, and that bigger thing that you're a piece of. Yeah. That sounds like a great way to bring it to a close. For nearly 30 years, G&D Chillers has set the mark for quality equipment you can rely on. The Malt House is your online source for cool and exclusive Rahr Malting Company gear. Trust the experts at Old Orchard to handle freight for your ingredients. Get detailed insight into your fermentations with Brew Monitor risk-free. Put SS Brewtex advances to work in your brew house, just like Cameron does right here at 8th State, and try New Zealand's most flavorful, sustainably farmed hops from Hop Revolution. If you enjoy this podcast every week, we'd love your support. Go to beerandbrew.com, click on the subscribe button. If you happen to have a brewery in planning, go to breweryworkshop.com for information on our Portland, Oregon accelerator this coming July. Like I said at the top, we are in the midst of our sold out Asheville accelerator. In fact, every one of the brewery workshops is sold out. It's kind of awesome. We keep them small, we keep them tight. It should be, so they're hands-on and people get one-to-one attention on all of those. We're coming back in July to Portland, Oregon, because there is interest, and we have, and I'm glad that we're now at a part in the market again, where in this getting through COVID era, that we can do these things again, and there's more interest in maintaining this kind of hospitality and new brewery approach, especially as another generation of older brewery owners is retiring and the new generation is looking to step in and take some of those places. Anyway, go to breweryworkshop.com for more information about that. Cameron, if people want to learn more about the 8th State, where do they find you in real life and out there on the interwebs?
You can go to 8thstatebrewing.com, or you can go to our Instagram. It's the 8th State Brewing. We spell it with the in an 8, like the number, TH State Brewing. We have that account as well as the taproom account. Otherwise, you can find us on Facebook too, but those are all reliable sources of information. Our regular site's going to just have, the cocktails, the bourbon,
sure,
all the to-go products. It's going to be great. Anyway.
And then in real life, right here in Greenville, South Carolina.
In Greenville, I would check out places like Greenville Beer Exchange, Community Tap, The Whale. They're really good friends of ours.
Sure.
As well as a couple other spots like Habitat on the other side of town. So, yeah,
we popped into The Whale in Nashville the other night. It's a fantastic beer bar, and I just love beer bars. I love people that approach beer with that kind of care and finesse and deep love, and build lists like they do and serve it in that kind of way.
Yeah. You got to admire the Jesse and Ross and the team at The Whales and all of the locations that they have.
Sure.
I mean, they're just, love them all.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining for the podcast, Cameron.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been great talking with you.
Yeah,
Cheers.
It's been great. Thanks.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com, or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.